Well, good evening and welcome to another webinar from the How You Diet. It's hard to believe that 2022 is already on its way and we're into February. And we have an exciting presentation for you this evening with Dr. Siobhan Jackson-Michel. And we can't wait to get into that. Before we do though, I'd like to welcome you and pray that you've had a great start to the new year. You know, this is a real interesting topic with the gut, and of course the pandemic has been affecting everybody in this country, and it's real interesting to see how our gut and the health of our gut really impacts us as we're looking at the pandemic and trying to find ways to manage and stay healthy through the different things that we're facing. But we're working on a new platform this evening. We've switched from the old webinar platform to a Zoom. And so work with us as we're trying to learn this new technology. We pray that everything will work well. And use the chat function and communicate with us. Let us know what you're thinking and any questions, and we'll try to answer them as we go through. Before we get started, though, let's just open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to share this information, Lord, and for presenting information on how people can take care of their health and maintain health through the scary times that the pandemic has presented, Lord. We pray that you'll just cover the technology, make everything work smoothly, and help Dr. Siobhan present the information and help us to hear and have open, discerning ears that we're able to implement some of the things that she tells us and shares with us into our personal lives. We thank you for this opportunity and pray that you'll bless everyone on the call this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, Dr. Siobhan has been with us a number of times. And for those that aren't familiar with her, she's a licensed naturopathic doctor, and she brings extensive expertise to the natural health industry, both from her personal experience as a practitioner, but also as a researcher. She is a best-selling author of collaborative work, and she is also a sought-after speaker, both domestically and internationally. So Dr. Siobhan, it's a real privilege to have you with us this evening. We look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, Hallelujah Diet, for having me, and also, all of who are in the audience tonight. I really appreciate your time. And so, as introduced, I wanted to speak about something, that was quite relevant. And I think, the broader audience, Paul mentioned specifically about, here, in the US domestically, but, this is a global pandemic, and its effects have been far-reaching and, have really tapped many areas, things that we didn't even associate, with the impact of an infectious disease, how it's rippled over in so many other areas of life. And so I hope, again, that this topic, just kind of brings some connections to you guys, and hopefully, as Paul said, there's a way that you can implement some of this into your lifestyle and daily living. So I titled this presentation Gut Instinct, just kind of a play on words, and somewhat bringing the idea and the connection between the GI tract and or the GI system, gastrointestinal system, and the brain or the nervous system. So instincts we kind of associate with our brain, and we kind of associate with our nervous system and our ability to respond to certain types of triggers and certain types of influences around us. And usually that instinct is somewhat like a reflex. It's sort of automatic, somewhat involuntary. And our gut, it's this thing that helps us digest our food and absorb our nutrients and, filters bad things, waste products from the good things like our nutrients. And we have this term that we use often, gut instinct. Well, tonight we're going to talk about how we support this connection between the brain and the gut through this global pandemic. And one of the couple of things that I want to share tonight is the connection between the gut and the brain. I want to share some statistics on the perceived stress during the pandemic. So stress is one thing, right? But how we actually perceive it, how we take it in, how it affects us is really what matters. So the perceived stress during the pandemic and its connection to certain types of gut disorders, particularly what we call functional gut disorders. We want to understand how a particular functional gut disorder called functional dyspepsia presents and how common it is. And we're also going to talk about ginger as a natural, spice, something that has probably been discussed throughout the pandemic for its immunity benefits. And we're going to talk about it mostly from the perspective of the GI tract, but we're going to draw some connection to the nervous system as well. Its effectiveness, the effectiveness of ginger with different formulations. So we'll talk about, like, people have consumed tea and candy and, juice extracted from fresh ginger, doing powders versus, those types of options, and why they might be different. We're going to talk about the quality of a product within the H diet portfolio, and we're going to talk about some lesser known benefits of ginger. So I'm going to just jump right in talking to you guys about what the science is saying with regards to COVID and its effects on the gut. So this was some quotes taken from a journal of Gastroenterology. It's called Current Opinions in Gastroenterology Journal in 2020, towards the end of 2020. They discuss here the fact that stress is associated with a lot of pathology or a lot of diseases of psychology, things like depression and anxiety. That's pretty known, that stress can trigger or worsen or affect things like depression and anxiety. But they also make a note here that the connection between those two things could be inflammatory hormones. So the inflammatory types of chemicals that are released during stress are what could alter some of the networks in our brain and how we perceive things, and therefore set the stage for things like depression and anxiety. So that's kind of the backdrop. What you see pointed out in red is the connection to COVID. And so what they were discussing here as part of their conclusion was that in the next 3 months, so from the time that this was written, which was like around May when it was published, in the next 3 months of 2020, so June, July, August, or into the third and fourth quarter of the year, they were expecting to see that there would be increase in depression, increase in anxiety as people continue to deal with this, the stressor, this stressor of long-term nature. In the second bullet, you'll notice that they speak a little bit to how this applies to gastrointestinal disorders. And what they say here is that, again, as the pandemic unfolds, as we kind of stay in this long-term stress scenario for an extended period of time, we're going to see some of those effects not only on the neurological system, like stress, anxiety, depression. We're going to see that it has these spillover effects in the GI tract. And we know the reason why is because of this thing called the gut-brain axis, or what we call the GALT. It's a connection between the gut and the immune system and also the brain. So 2 points here. We know that stress puts us in a situation where we're more susceptible to psychological conditions like depression and anxiety. And then prolonged stress in that context will have layover effects into the gastrointestinal tract. Okay. And I want to kind of give you guys an idea as to why. What's going on that there's this connection. So you have This big tube that you see is kind of simulating the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract or your gut. What you see kind of on the outside would be the outside of the gut, and then this is the inside where food is traveling all along. Okay, and they're showing you here just an image of the brain and this very long neuron or nerve connection point between the brain and the gut. So when we are in a state of relaxation, okay, or a state of calm, we kind of call this rest and digest. It's part of the nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. That part of the nervous system is active during rest and during relaxed, non-critical times, okay? So when the parasympathetic nervous system is active, you're going to have optimal digestive function, okay? So we kind of call this rest and digest. That's the connection. When you're having optimal digestive function, is during a resting period, relaxing period, non-stressful, non-critical periods. That can be over the hour, over the day, over the month, over the year, okay? So we're talking about rest. Some of the things that happen during optimal rest and digestive function, so during this rest and digest or parasympathetic control, you have improved or optimized sensory and motor function. That means that the gut is able to sense its environment, what kind of foods are coming in, what kind of nutrients are traveling through. It's able to move things along properly. So we call that peristalsis. That's kind of those contractile movements that allow food to move from, the esophagus after you swallow it all the way down to the lower part of the colon and out of the body. So sensory and motor function is optimized. Pain signals are kind of muted, so you don't have this kind of hyper pain situation. You're not hypersensitive. So the body is able to perceive pain, but it's not overly perceiving pain and changes in the environment. There's lots of stuff going on when you're digesting food. Your stomach is churning, making all kind of movements. Those the length of the digestive tract is all twisting on itself. So there has to be some level of not hypersensitivity. It has to have a little bit of buffer there. So transmission of pain signals is moderate. It helps you to mediate hunger. Okay, so during rest and digest, those hunger signals, the gurgling of the stomach, all of that is again optimized during rest. Facilitating GI secretion. So again, putting out those enzymes that will help you break down your food and regulating motility, again, which is the movement, right? So during relaxation, during rest, during low stress periods, the gut function is optimized. We call that rest and digest, okay? One of the main conditions that has been shown to be affected by COVID is something called functional dyspepsia, and I'll give you some more statistics around that in just a few minutes. Functional dyspepsia is a functional gut health condition. So it means that there's no real pathology, there's no real damage that can be seen in the digestive tract, but the way that it operates, the way that it functions is altered, okay? And so functional dyspepsia is associated with stress and has been associated with COVID stress in particular. Functional dyspepsia is also termed upper irritable bowel syndrome. So if you've ever heard of IBS, IBS is usually discussing about functional disorder or functional issues with the lower GI tract, the colon, okay? The colon is where you absorb your water, you move feces along. So with IBS, generally they have issues with their bowel movements. It can be loose stools, it can be constipation, there can be pain and things of that sort. With functional dyspepsia, it happens above the colon. So in the small intestines and in the stomach. Okay, we call it upper irritable bowel syndrome or upper IBS. However, there's a lot of symptoms that do overlap because remember, it's one very long tube, if you will. Functional dyspepsia has a global influence. It affects people all over the world, particularly in, you can say, countries like the US, countries where there's a lot more stress. stressful living, you do see more of these kind of functional gut disorders. We know that it can affect somewhere between 2.5% and 5%, all the way upwards to 20% of the population. And again, in those countries where, again, there's a huge burden of stress, stressful life, stressful living, you see that there's a greater predominance of functional dyspepsia. So US, the percentage is really more around 15 to 20% of the population suffer from it. Some of the causes or contributing factors to functional dyspepsia are smoking, alcohol, stress, we talked about that, anxiety, certain medications, H. pylori, which is a bacterial infection that can happen in the stomach and also in the small intestines, and even obesity. So these are contributing factors to functional dyspepsia, and you can have multiple. All in all, those causes or contributing factors lead to one main issue, which is hypomotility. The gut, the tube of the digestive tract does not move properly, okay? So in order for things to move, just like you moving your arms, moving your legs, all of that is controlled by the nervous system, by the brain, by the spinal cord. So hypomotility means that it's not moving properly. There could be spasms, there could be lack of movement, which will affect absorption of nutrients. It could affect downstream the removal of waste products or how fast you're moving, waste and having bowel movements. It can affect just how full you feel. I'm going to show you guys just some images in a few minutes of some of what the symptoms, how they present. Before we do that, I want to hone in that first, those conclusions that were drawn by that first article that I presented at the beginning, talking about how COVID stress, anxiety, depression, and gut health are all linked. There's some additional studies where they actually looked at these particular functional gut disorders. So functional dyspepsia, that's FD, and IBS, which is, the lower version of functional dyspepsia. And they looked at a population, so this is non-FD IBS, so non-functional dyspepsia, non-IBS. These are healthy people as far as gut function go. And then they looked at, and that was the larger group, okay? So we kind of call that a control group. There were 4,000 subjects that they looked at there. And then in the functional dyspepsia only, so they only had the upper IBS group. And then they had an IBS only, so a lower true IBS population. They had about 600 subjects there. And then they had an overlap population where they had both upper GI symptoms and lower GI symptoms of IBS. And you can see here what these coordinates of color show. So this is kind of looking at a spectrum on how much difference they experience in their symptoms in the COVID period. So over the course of the beginning of 2020 into towards the end of 2020. I think this is from it was published in December. Okay, so in the in the healthy group, you can see the 4,000 subjects, their symptoms didn't really get better. Some people got slightly better, less than 2.5% of people improved. Most people stayed about the same as far as their gut function. Some people got a little bit worse, about 5%, and then less than 1% got much worse. In the functional dyspepsia only group, you can see that as opposed or as compared to the control group, a healthy population, a percentage more people got better. So 1.6 versus 1.7 versus 0.6. So 1% more people got better, but more people got slightly better during the course of the pandemic for whatever reason. Less people stayed the same, okay? So there was a shift in the people who actually started to experience more symptoms post-pandemic or post, certain number of months into the pandemic. About 17, 18% got slightly worse, and about 2% became significantly worse. You can see in IBS, it got even more of a disparity there, where a bigger portion got worse with lower IBS symptoms. And you can see in the overlap group, people who had upper symptoms and lower symptoms, they actually got the worst over the course of the pandemic. So about 44% of them got slightly worse in their symptoms, and over 7% got much worse in their symptoms post-pandemic. And we're trying, we in these studies, they kind of controlled for as many other factors as possible. And so they were able to kind of associate this specifically with the stress of the pandemic. All right. This is another study. That study was from December 2020. Now into 2021, you know, we kind of had a little bit of a reprieve. Things got a little bit better, but they still found that some of the symptoms were persistent and they continued even into 2021 and actually got worse in some populations. So IBS, they didn't distinguish between upper or lower here. I'm sorry, IBS, they did distinguish. So lower IBS and then functional dyspepsia, the upper IBS, increased by 75% when they compared to pre-COVID estimates. Okay, so the last study that we just saw, they looked at COVID from the beginning of 2020 towards the end of 2020. Okay, so within the COVID pandemic. This next study wanted to check 2021 and 2021 rates of these disorders, and they compared it backwards into 2015 and to 2017. Okay, and they were able to see overall a 75% increase. So you can see here in just an IBS population back in the fall of 2015, when they did a similar assessment, about 4.7% of people, you know, were you know, having these type of IBS symptoms. It increased slightly in 2017 to about 5.3, but then it jumped when you get to the beginning of March of 2021, which means we were 1 year into the pandemic, to 8.2%. And actually even into May of that year, it continued to go up into 8.4%. Now look at functional dyspepsia, almost the same increase. In 2017, it was about 10.1%. And when you jump into 1 year into the pandemic, it's 18%. And, you know, roughly staying in the same ballpark. It dropped a little bit by May of that year to 17%, but roughly in the same ballpark, a 75% increase in these gut disorders. So I want to stop and I want to ask a quick question. What level of increased stress, if any, have you experienced since the start of the pandemic, since 2020 into now 2022? So, chat, let's see what people are saying. Here's the some C's. Yes, yes, yep, okay. Good, so a lot of answers coming in. I see a lot of people between an average increase, so 4 to 6 out of 10, with a number of people in the D and E range as well, going even above 10. See a couple of A's and a couple of B's, no increased stress. I would say on average, I'm seeing the majority of people have had some moderate increase in stress. Okay, so somewhere between 4 and 6 out of 10, which is probably expected. And again, depending on a lot of other factors, some people have shown a significant increase, and some people even less. So on average, most people are coming in with the answer of C. Their stress has increased somewhat during this pandemic, moderately. All right, so let's continue. All right, so this is another statistic that came out of the Commonwealth Fund, which they do a lot of statistics, you know, and they do a lot of surveys essentially, and they came up with this result here. This chart is showing the percentage of adults in select countries who reported stress, anxiety, or great sadness since the COVID-19 outbreak starting in 2020. And so we talked about this being a global pandemic, and perhaps this has many, many, many reasons why, whether it's lockdowns, whether it's, you know, a lot of disputes and bickering on, you know, which side of the fence you're on, what you believe, if you don't believe, you know, whatever it is. But you can see that we are, for the most part, I think on this call located in the US, and the US came up as the country with the most perceived stress, anxiety, or sadness as it relates to the COVID-19 outbreak. And again, you know, obviously there was a huge loss of life here. So of course that contributed to that. So Cleveland Clinic, they put out another statistic that said Americans are more likely to feel stressed, anxious, or depressed during the fall of 2021 phase of the pandemic than during the fall of 2020. So where we kind of thought, or maybe thought, even I thought, that people were more stressed at the beginning of the pandemic in the first year, we're actually finding that people are still dealing with residual and possibly more comprehensive effects of the pandemic in the second phase, or in the second, you know, year of it in 2021. And now we're in 2022. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how this changes over time. All right, so we had that nice picture here where I told you guys that when the parasympathetic nervous system is active, we have rest and digest. We have optimal function of the GI tract. But when stress comes in, okay, you can see this big, you know, call out here, you know, some kind of perceived stress, particularly chronic stress, you will change the function of priority in the body, okay? The body is not really thinking about digesting that sandwich or, you know, that plate of food that you just ate. It's not thinking about that when you're trying to, you know, they always give the scenario, you're running away, you know, from a bear. You're really not trying to think about, you know, using the bathroom or digesting your food or making sure that you know, absorb all of your nutrients. That is literally put on pause so that you can get out of danger. Okay, so it's a fight or flight mechanism that's activated during stress, and your body doesn't know the difference between the stress of a pandemic or the stress of getting a bad grade at school or the stress of losing your job or the stress of being chased by a bear. Okay, it's a very you know, old system that regulates this in our body. So we don't really perceive the difference between the type of stress. It's just stress. So some of the effects of that are going to be sleep disturbances, reduced digestive juice production, reduced motility. So remember we said you can get spasms as a result of that. You can get a change in the microbiome. So the good bacteria in the gut, you can get more bad bacteria developing, less of the good bacteria growing. Because of the increase in bad bacteria, you get fermentation. So they produce lots of gas because of how they break down the products, you know, that are in the colon. You can get inflammation because of all of those inflammatory signals that are released as an effect of stress. Because of all of those inflammatory chemicals hanging around, you get damage, almost like little holes in the GI tract where they shouldn't be. And we call that intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And because of that, it goes from being a local inflammation just in the gut due to stress to being widespread or whole body or systemic inflammation. So stress affects digestion. You kind of think of it, or you might have thought of it as a very, you know, local type of influence, but you can see how it's almost like a domino effect where it can have whole body impact. So I got another question for you guys. Have you ever experienced any abdominal manifestation of anxiety, nervousness, or sadness? So have you ever had stomach pain as a result of having to do public speaking? So any kind of anxiety, nervousness, or sadness type of scenario, has it ever caused any abdominal type of symptom? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of C's. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, some D's, yes, and I know others. Yep, okay, saw one A in there. All right, thanks so much, guys, for participating. So overwhelmingly, I think I see mostly C and D's. So yes, I have, and yes, I know others that have. The reason I mention that is it doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong, right? If you have to go on a stage and perform and you kind of start feeling like your stomach is churning, you got kind of, you know, a nervous belly, or those are normal manifestations of how the brain perceiving a stressor like talking in public is immediately communicating with your digestive tract. It's just so that you can see that there's a connection there, and you've probably experienced that at some point in your life. And if you haven't, likely you know someone who has. Some people are more extreme than others, of course. But overall, I think all of us have had that experience in some way, shape, or form. All right, now, this is where we get good and we kind of get into talking about what we could do about this, considering the fact that we're all still in the pandemic and we're all kind of hanging out here. And some of us have had symptoms of stress, and some of us have possibly had symptoms of gut, impact of the gut as a result of that stress. So I want to teach you guys about this particular type of cell that we have in the digestive tract. This is what we call a chemosensory cell. They're called enterochromatin cells, or EC cells for short. I'll call them EC cells. It's a mouthful, EC cells for short. So these are chemosensory cells, and they are very rare cells found in the intestines. Like only 1% of the whatever million or however many intestinal cells we have, only 1% of them are these chemosensory cells. And they're so cool because they are almost like the nose inside of our GI tract. That's how I want you guys to think about it. It's a link between what is hanging around in the digestive tract that you ingest, and is linked to your nervous system. Okay, so it's a connection between sensory, like your nose would sense certain smells in the environment. You sprayed a perfume, or you smell someone cooking, baking cookies, and then all of a sudden it kind of makes your stomach, you know, start getting active, makes you start salivating, you know, you start expressing digestive juices or whatever. This is kind of like the nose inside of your gut. Okay, and so this nose is pretty cool because it can sense things in our diet. So it's not necessarily smelling things, right, per se, but it's sensing things in our diet. And then it's doing something about it. The way in which it does whatever it does, which oftentimes has to do with movement, is by producing serotonin. And everybody associates serotonin with the happy hormone, right? It's the hormone that is low in certain conditions like depression, and it's what we consider, you know, helping us with those types of mood-related concerns. But serotonin does more than that. It's not just a neurotransmitter that interacts with the nervous system. Yes, that's true. But in the gut, it regulates motility. So it helps your gut to know to move and to contract and to move whatever's inside of it along so that things can be absorbed and excrement can be released. It also is involved in secretion. So when there's serotonin around, it's almost like it's like an instruction to release certain enzymes or acid or whatever is required to digest the food that's in the gut. It also controls sensitivity and hypersensitivity. So remember I said you got lots of things moving around in your digestive tract as it's doing its work. So the system cannot be oversensitive, or every time, you know, you took a bite of food, you would be in pain. So there has to be a balance between sensitivity and hypersensitivity. So serotonin is involved in that. And where people think that most of your serotonin is made in your brain, actually that's false. 90% of your serotonin is made inside of your gut. Okay, so this is really important with, again, that brain and gut connection. There are these receptors that are on these EC cells that literally pick up pungent spices. Okay, so remember I said it's like your nose. It's picking up it's sensing the presence of pungent spices and other types of botanicals. And one of the main ones that it picks up is the spice ginger. Okay, other ones in the similar family, pepper, like hot pepper, cayenne, turmeric is in that category as well, but ginger is one in particular. It also interacts with different chemicals that might be in the GI tract, different toxins that might be released from the bacteria that are hanging out there, and they can sense inflammatory molecules as well. Okay, so this is kind of a picture. Might be hard to orient yourself, so let me help you. We're looking at the one of these cells. So what you're looking at here is, we call it like a villi. A villi is part of your intestinal cells. It's like fingers, okay? So each of this would be like one finger, okay? So around that one finger, you got all these different types of cells. These cells are doing all kinds of things. Some of them are absorbing cells, some of them are secreting cells, and then every so often you got that rare cell called the EC cell. Okay, and what it's showing you is right here on the outside, those are things that are in your digestive tract. Okay, so this is again like a finger on a hand, and that finger is absorbing things that are around the finger. Okay, so this is the finger. So you can see that these could be food molecules or what have you, but in this particular case, we're talking about irritants, okay? These spices, particularly ginger. And there's a kind of receptor called the TRPA1. You don't need to know that, but that's what picks up the spice. It can sense it, so this cell can do what it's supposed to. And as a result, this cell will produce 5-HT. 5-HT is serotonin. Okay, and then your nervous system will receive that serotonin and do something about it. Okay, so this finger is part of your digestive tract, the absorptive surface. It's in contact with all these different things, including food particles and molecules. In particular, we're talking about the ginger spice, which I have here is orange. When we superimpose and we kind of, zoom in, you'll see that this is the irritant. This is that rare cell. When the irritant is perceived by that cell through its receptor, it's going to produce serotonin. That serotonin is going to interact with the nervous system. There's some stuff that's going to happen. All right, I like this cartoon. This is the gut-brain axis connection, kind of how they communicate with each other. So the brain is telling the gut, I don't care if you aren't hungry, I want serotonin, right? So that's probably contrary to what a lot maybe of you guys have thought, or I would say, other, people probably think serotonin is made in the brain. Brain is saying, give me serotonin, because really it's the gut that's doing the job. All right, so let's talk about ginger. Ginger is pretty cool. I mean, I'm pretty sure if you've had any kind of Asian cuisine, you've had ginger in your life, and you might juice ginger, you might have had ginger candies. I recently had a baby. I did lots of ginger chews while I was pregnant because I had a lot of nausea. So ginger is very common. Ginger has over 400 compounds, like most natural products. It's mostly water. Okay, so when it's fresh, it's 80% water. When it's dried, it's really only 20% substance. And of that 20% substance, you're getting a large percentage of it is carbs. You have some fats or lipids. You have some essential oils, which give you the aroma for ginger, and you have these polyphenols. Okay, the polyphenols are really the medicinal part of ginger. Okay, one of the medicinal parts of ginger. Polyphenols in general are usually anti-inflammatory. They have antioxidant properties. These are the phytonutrients, the plant-based nutrients that we care about as it pertains to this subject today. These polyphenols are responsible for the pungency, the spiciness of ginger. Okay, now in fresh ginger, you're going to have a lot of one type of these polyphenols called gingerols. Okay. You're also going to have this other type called shagarols, but it's going to be minimal. Okay, so the primary type that you have of these polyphenols, these really rich medicinal compounds inside of ginger, are going to be gingerols. You find them in the fresh form. Shagalols you get when ginger is dried. So if you set your ginger that you just bought from the supermarket out on your table for whatever, a few weeks or a few months, you're going to see that it starts to lose some of its, its water, right? It's going to start to shrivel a little bit. And what you're going to get is the conversion of those gingerols, a lot of them, to shagalols. Okay, so shagalols are also very potent. Okay, gingerols and shagalols are very potent. When you cook or you add solvents, right, which solvents you kind of can get that when you get a extract of ginger or when you get a tablet of ginger or something like that. They may use solvents to kind of concentrate these polyphenols. When you cook ginger or you apply a solvent, you actually convert these shagalols, which I told you were very potent, just like the gingerols, into something called paradols, okay? And the paradols are actually not potent at all. You actually lose a lot of potency from the paradols. But what you get is a sweeter ginger, okay? So when you cook ginger, you change the flavor profile, but you don't get as strong of, you don't get as much of the polyphenols that are active in terms of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and even the benefits that we're talking about today as it pertains to GI health. But you get a sweeter ginger. It's better for the palate usually when you're trying to make candies and things of that nature. Okay, so you might lose potency, but you kind of change flavor. There's another component called Gingerone. This also happens mostly during drying. That has some potency. It also is sweeter than gingerol. So anyway, the point here is that you got a lot of these different chemicals, but they change and they're altered based off of how you prepare the ginger. Okay, ginger also has some vitamins. It has lots of minerals. It has fiber, protein, in minimal quantities as well. So ginger's action on the gut, it reduces gas, it reduces bloating, it reduces muscle tension, okay, between the lower esophagus and the stomach. So things again are moving down and not coming back up. It's anti-spasmodic. So in the cases of people having spasms or the pain that results from spasms, ginger is anti-spasmodic. Most importantly, it's a motility enhancer. Remember, we said we want things to move down and out of the body. That is the whole point of the gut. It's almost like wringing out a rag, right? As you're wringing out, you're getting more and more water that's released. And in the context of the GI tract, you're absorbing those nutrients. So what comes out the other side is pretty null. It doesn't really have much benefit. It also increases lower stomach activity and contractions. Okay, so again, ultimately we want things to move down and out. So functional dyspepsia, what we were talking about before, this condition that we know is now showing to have effects based off of COVID, based off of chronic stress situations. These rates are going up. These are the way functional dyspepsia presents, okay? Main symptoms, we call them cardinal symptoms. You have this fullness that occurs after a meal. So your stomach feels ultra full, more full than what you ate, right? So it's generally a lot of gas that develops, and so you feel very full. You get early satiety. That means you feel full fast, okay? So you haven't even eaten half of your plate and you're already full. That's a main symptom of functional dyspepsia. Epigastric pain, so that's pain above the belly button, okay? So pain in that area, again, usually it happens because of gas, because of fermentation, things not moving down properly, and you're getting kind of that stuck feeling right above the belly button. You can even get burning in the stomach. That sensation is also quite common. Other symptoms are you get bloating. So remember we said that gaseousness, you can feel like your stomach is, spreading out to the sides of your abdomen, like it just feels super full in that area. And you may even have an enlargement of the gut right above the belly button. Heartburn is also an associated symptom, nausea and belching. So ginger, again, as a gut-brain modulator. So this is just another picture to show you what we were talking about, these EC cells, right? And ginger here in the lumen. So this is where food is coming in, fats, all kinds of stuff are there. Ginger will interact with that receptor. It will stimulate this EC cell, almost like your nose. And then the EC cell, as a response, will put out serotonin. And serotonin, this is part of your nervous system. It's called the enteric nervous system. The nervous system will respond to that serotonin locally by increasing motility or modulating motility so that you don't have spasms and you have continuous, kind of effortless movement. So I want to talk to you guys about a clinical study that was done on the ingredient that is in the professional strength ginger that we'll talk about tonight through the Hallelujah Diet portfolio of products. So this study was a gold standard study, so double-blind, placebo-controlled. It took place over 1 month, 28 days exactly, and they studied at 14 days in. So they did 2 weeks into the study and then a total of 4 weeks, where they followed 50 subjects, male and female. The average age, or the age range, was between 18 and 55 years old. And these people came into the clinical study having self-reported digestive complaints, okay? So the picture looked a lot like what functional dyspepsia looks like, okay? And they also had anxiety. So they had both self-reported digestive complaints as well as anxiety. And they were given the active here called Ginfort. They were given it 200 milligrams twice per day in a capsule. And what this study wanted to look at is two of the things that you see here in this chart. They wanted to look at how many people actually responded to taking Ginfort versus taking a placebo, both at 14 days into the study and 28 days at the end of the study. And we also wanted to see, in terms of the change in the symptoms, okay, how well, what percentage of change in the total symptoms for those populations, the ones taking ginger and the ones taking the placebo. So you can see the responder rate. The responder rate is how we determine the overall kind of treatment efficacy. For day 14, 40% of people responded to taking Ginfort. That means they had some improvement in symptoms. That improvement was scaled based off of a 7-point scale, meaning they got significantly worse or they got significantly better, or significantly aggravated the symptoms, or significantly improved the symptoms. So 40% of people responded. They improved with the intake of ginger at 2 weeks, okay, 200 milligrams twice per day. And then you can see the compared placebo group that pretty much no one responded. There was no beneficial change noted at 2 weeks. And then in the Ginfort group at 28 days, you can see over 80% of the people who took the ginger product responded with improvement of symptoms, versus the placebo, only about 20% responded. Okay, it could be placebo effect or it could be various other things. In terms of the change in dyspeptic symptoms, so that means how much change did they have over time, the percentage of change. Remember, we're going from extremely aggravated, wherever they were on that spectrum, to extremely improved, okay? And you can see in the Ginfort group, both at day 14 and at day 28, they had a significant, more than 70% change in their symptoms, improvement in their symptoms from where they started the study 4 weeks before. You can see as it compares to the placebo, there was less than 40%, so almost a doubling of difference in change over time. They also looked at something else in the study called the elimination rate of major symptoms. So they wanted to look at 3 of those symptoms that I showed you guys, the cardinal and the associated symptom. They wanted to look at fullness after you eat, upper abdominal bloating, and early satiety, so being full fast. Those are 3 major symptoms of functional dyspepsia. And at day 28, Ginfort group, or the ginger product group, actually had more than 50% of the people who took it eliminated, completely eliminated, went to actual no symptoms after 4 weeks of treatment, 28 days of treatment. In the placebo group, about a little bit less than 20% of people were able to eliminate their major symptoms, okay, after 28 days of taking the product. And then you can see elimination rate for other symptoms. So this was 3 symptoms together that they looked at in particular. And then these are some of the individual symptoms that I showed you on that picture. Upper abdominal bloating, discomfort, fullness, early fullness, belching. The only symptom that really wasn't different between the placebo and the ginger group was vomiting. There was really no big difference between those that symptom, but even heartburn and nausea saw significant improvement with the ginger group at 4 weeks. So the professional strength ginger, I want to talk just a little bit about it because this features that same ingredient that was studied in the study we just talked about with those kind of results. Normally ginger is the gingeroids. We talked about gingerol and shagawalt as the really potent polyphenols that are found in ginger. Collectively, they're called gingeroids, okay? So gingerol and shagawalt together are called gingeroids. Normally, you're gonna find them less than 2% in dried, ginger. In this professional strength ginger, you're gonna find them at 26%, okay, of the weight of the product. So every capsule of the amount of material of ginger in that capsule, 26% of it will be those potent gingerols, okay? By doing it this way, the process behind it is completely solvent-free. Remember I said that the solvents actually can change it and give you the less potent forms or inefficacious forms of ginger. Well, this is done completely solvent-free, so you have the actual active forms of ginger present. Instead of using solvents, they're using CO2 extraction, which is considered safe, and it kind of keeps the potency of the product there. It minimizes degradation, and you are able to get this product delivered into a powder format, which is super cool. Professional strength ginger is also the active ingredient behind it is patented globally across the world. It's award-winning. It was actually awarded just last year, I think around October or so of last year. It was awarded by the government of India for what's called Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprise Award. So it's an award given to innovation that comes out of the country. And so this was derived out of India. And it validates gut health traditions. So we always know that ginger, I've showed you guys why ginger works in the gut, but in particular, because there's a clinical study at a specific dose, the actual dose that you're getting in this professional strength ginger, it's validating what we've already known about ginger, but so that you don't have to, decide, okay, is my product gonna work, blah, blah, blah. No, at 200 milligrams twice per day, you should expect to see similar symptoms that were found in this clinical study. We're also studying ginger for some other benefits. So in close, I would just like to ask you guys, what other benefits do you know of that are associated with ginger beyond gut health? And we'll close with that. If you guys can just give me any of those answers in the chat. Good, I see immunity, joint pain, immunity again, joint pain, all of the above. I see a couple of all of the above. Yes, headache relief. Yes, good, awesome. Yes, plantar fasciitis. Yep, another inflammatory condition. So very good. I think you guys are right on target. I see a couple people didn't think that ginger was associated with any of those other things that are mentioned here in A, B, C, or D. And actually the answer here is A, B, C, D. Maybe not all of the above, but A, B, D, A, B, C, D. Immunity, reducing menstrual pain, helping with pregnancy sickness, relieving joint pain or other types of pain that are inflammatory, inflammation triggered. So thank you all so much. That was my last slide, and I'll give it back to you, Paul.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Siobhan. And
really interesting information, both in how it affects the gastrointestinal, and the serotonin was amazing. But I guess the question is, why is gut health so important? And we talked about serotonin, but I think it goes so much farther than that. And can you expound a little bit on the importance of gut health and how Ginfort really comes back and supports that?
Sure. I think that's a really good question. So, I mean, gut health, if you guys remember that slide that I mentioned about what stress does to the gut, it's a kind of reverse way of answering the question. But, our gut health is so important, not only to the amount of nutrients, the type of nutrients that we're absorbing, we're getting into our system so that they can fuel, all of the various, processes that are happening in our body every day. But it's also important for getting toxins out of our body, right? Through proper bowel movements and daily bowel movements, we're actually removing literal toxins that can sit, and they can putrefy, and they can, in the colon, they can predispose you to polyps and colon cancer and lots of things down the line. With the gut and inflammation, and even certain types of microbes, right? If you don't have proper secretory function, meaning the secretion of those enzymes and the secretion of acids, your gut is literally one of your first line of defense of your immune system. It's part of what separates you, the inside from the outside. And so if you don't have proper acid production, you actually are interfering with your immune function, because you cannot kill off certain microbes that might come in on your food, or might come in, in another way through your mouth. And those microbes can wreak havoc in the body. They can cause inflammation. Inflammation in the gut is literally like drilling holes into the rest of the body. It allows all kinds of things that should not be allowed into the body, that are too large, that are irritating to our system, that really should not be allowed to pass into the bloodstream. That leads to, it can lead to inflammatory conditions. It can lead to food allergies. The list really goes on and on. I mean, the gut is so important for our immune health. It literally links every other system of the body, I think. I mean, even when you have issues with your gut, you can see that you can have issues with your skin. You have issues with your gut, you can have issues with your joints. It literally links every other system of the body. So I don't know if I was able to put that into a small, into a nutshell, to minimize, not minimize, but to summarize that in a short period of time, Paul. But I think the question is very poignant, because the gut influences everything in the entire body.
Yeah, and so often we look at the symptoms, and okay, so we have some indigestion, or we have belching, or flatulence, or whatever it is, but we don't really fully appreciate the impact that the gut has in maintaining the overall health of the body, and in creating the nutrition, and in the detoxification. So it's just, it's so hard really to get people to understand that connection.
Yeah, it's so important. It's literally the health starts in the gut. I think that's like an old school saying, but it's really, really, really true. The health of your gut really will determine, or can determine, the health of the rest of the body. And so just paying a lot of attention there is very important. So, yep.
And so, can you speak for a moment on inflammation, and how that inflammation impacts the gut, and that impact also influences the body?
Sure. So, the inflammatory, so there's a couple things. Inflammation can lead to, or oftentimes leads to, literal damage of the gut lining, okay? Literal damage. And this is what I was talking about, like drilling little holes. your gut cells or your intestinal cells are they sit very close to one another, okay? And they only allow certain things through, very tiny nutrients, okay, like your vitamins and your minerals. They allow, gases through, oxygen, carbon dioxide. They allow ions through, like your sodium ions, potassium chloride ions. They are very precise as to what they allow to slip between those cells that line your entire gut, okay? Now, inflammation, these inflammatory chemicals that are circulating for whatever reason, whether they start in the gut or whether they wind up in the circulation and kind of backtrack to the gut, they cause holes to be produced in the gut lining, or gaps, you can say, between the cells that normally sit very close to one another. And those gaps, they increase the junction between the cell, and things that would normally never, ever, ever, ever seep through between those cells actually get through. And if they get through, that means they have direct exposure to the bloodstream. And once they're in the bloodstream, they have exposure to the rest of the body. So leaky gut is one of the main connection points between inflammation, the gut, and systemic inflammation. And some of the triggers of that inflammation can, again, it can be the things that we're putting into our body, if they're full of, free radicals, if the foods that we're eating are processed, if they are, just fatty foods, excessive, like unnaturally fat foods, trans fats, and things of that nature. These things are going to produce a lot of free radicals, and those free radicals generate these types of inflammatory molecules. And so that's one way inflammation is related to the gut. The other way is what we're learning a lot about the microbiome. The microbiome, or the bacteria in the gut, really are, they can be for us or against us. So if they are good bacteria, we're learning more and more that they actually help us to maintain a healthy level of inflammation. So they keep inflammation at bay. But if you have bacteria in the gut that are not so good for you, they actually will promote inflammation, okay? And how do you get bacteria, or what we call dysbiosis, an imbalance between the good and the bad bacteria? It has a lot to do with diet. It has a lot to do with not having frequent and full enough bowel movements, and having, food kind of putrefy and stay there. It has to do with even consuming things like these types of spices. They actually contribute to the health of the bacteria in the gut. Turmeric has been shown a lot more recently to influence that as well. So I think both in dealing with leaky gut, or the disruption in that barrier between the outside and the inside world, and in disruption in the microbiome, those are both ways that inflammation can cause a lot of damage through the digestive tract to the rest of the body.
And so can the leaky gut, or the damage, be reversed? And would a ginger product support that? And, what connection would a migraine headache have with the inflammation or a leaky gut?
Sure. So, yes, leaky gut can be reversed. It is a process, because it means that you have to identify, those things which are causing damage to begin with. So part of that is, identifying the triggers for that leaky gut to begin with. Additionally, you need to have proper nutrients there so that the cells can replenish themselves, so that they can, grow those gaps that were created by inflammation and by all kinds of other factors. those gaps need to be closed. So there's certain, nutrients and foods that help those gaps to close better. And then overall quelling inflammation. So we talked about ginger in terms of its ability to improve serotonin production. And part of what we talked about with serotonin production helps you with motility and moving things along. And that helps with eventually like bowel movements and all of that. But it also, we talked about, helps with inflammation, right? And so if you're able to kind of quell the inflammation, those cells also heal on their own. The digestive cells, the cells that line the digestive tract, they replace themselves on average like every 3 to 7 days. And so if you can remove the triggers, it could be certain foods, it could be stress, it could be, bacteria or whatever. If you can remove the triggers, you can provide a healthy foundation of foods and nutrients, and then you can work on the inflammation using things like ginger, supporting serotonin, certain nutrients that you'll find in certain formulations. Those things collectively can heal leaky gut. And I think the last tail part of that question was with reference to migraine headaches. And so migraines can be for lots of different reasons. There's some migraines that are triggered by certain types of foods. So, identifying what those are sometimes an easy pathway. But migraines are also associated with serotonin, release of serotonin, and migraines are also associated with inflammation. So, ginger, by being able to modulate serotonin, we didn't just say it makes it haphazardly, it modulates, meaning it makes what it needs to make that will, replenish the body or give the body what it needs. And then it doesn't necessarily make an overage. So migraine headaches, there are migraine headaches that are triggered by too much serotonin. There are migraine headaches that are not enough serotonin. And like I said, inflammation. So ginger is a modulator in that way. So it could definitely benefit headaches, migraines that might have a serotonin or inflammation trigger.
Absolutely. Well, I know we've been really pushing the time limit. We thank you so much for your time. I think we just have a couple of questions left. We'll take these last two and kind of combine them into one. And, if somebody's had some bloating on one side of the stomach, does that make any sense from what your experience is? And if somebody was dealing with, they're not dealing with anything, they're healthy, would ginger help be recommended or be suggested for somebody not experiencing any negative symptoms?
So good question. So so one side, and I think somebody might have answered that in the chat as well. So your stomach is positioned off to the left. Okay, we kind of, when we think of the stomach, we usually like place our hands right over the middle of our abdomen. But there's part of it that's there, but the larger majority of the stomach is actually shifted over to the left. So it is quite possible that you can have more bloating, more gas, even gas pains towards the left side of the body, more than the right. And this person also mentioned, some lower bowel issues, which could be like diverticulitis. That could be also, either left or right side. But I think the main anatomical answer would be the stomach is shifted more naturally to the left side. And so definitely you could have more on the left side. And then the second question was, could ginger be used for someone not experiencing any symptoms? Yes. Ginger, like I said, it has so many benefits, but it also just is a source of those polyphenols are great antioxidants, and we're exposed to so many free radicals and so much oxidative stress in our general day-to-day living, whether it's from pollution, whether it is from stress. It may not be chronic stress, but acute stressors, sitting in traffic or what have you. Ginger also helps with the microbiome. it's on the order of 1 million bacteria are lost every day in your stool. So just not doing anything except using the toilet, puts you at a deficit of bacteria. And so, good bacteria possibly in that equation. So even just having ginger there, it helps with making sure that you keep a healthy proportion of good bacteria to bad bacteria, and help you to replace good bacteria, by giving the body what it needs to support that. So I think in terms of just general overall function, you have the antioxidant component, and you have just the overall support of healthy motility and healthy microbiome, levels, good bacteria to bad bacteria in the gut. And so, yeah, it's not specific, but it could have very specific benefits, as we discussed.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, we sure do appreciate all your wisdom and insights, and for you taking the time this evening to share this really life-changing information with people. And, we talk with people all the time, and we work with them to try to get them to understand the impact that the gut has on their overall health. And so we really value what you've shared this evening. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thanks again for having me. Take care, everyone.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll be back next time with another presentation. Until then, please stay in health, and may God bless. Have a great night.
God bless. Take care.
Night.